I think it's fair to say we live in a world that encourages us to try everything, to chase the dream, to travel the world, to find the boy or the girl, to leave a legacy, to make a difference, to live our best life, as we say. But for many, even when we've ticked all the boxes, when we've done all those things, we're still left asking, is that it? Well, our guest tonight has been there. He has done the searching, the striving, the seeking out to see what life has to offer, frankly. And then discovered that nothing really quite met the bill. And he was left with that deep longing and that deep search for peace and hope still. But that restlessness that he experienced came with it an unexpected discovery, one that changed everything. Well, enough from me. Let's put our hands together and welcome our guest today, Philip Grundy. Philip, have a seat. I'll just rearrange the cushions. It's great to see you here. Well, after that welcome, it better be pretty good tonight. Now,
no pressure.
Philip, you're married to Faye. You've got 3 lovely children, Annabelle, Hector, and Edmund, and you've been working in this city for 22 years in reinsurance. Now, I've been here for 4 years, and people have tried to explain it to me. Now, tell me, what is reinsurance?
Good question, Paul. It's very simply insurance for insurance companies.
Well, that's going to be an interesting evening. Let's try and dig. That doesn't sound very interesting to me, which is a bit rude to say to you, but I'm sure it is. We'll find out more about that in a moment. But we want to really get to meet the man behind the reinsurance company. When you're not doing that, what do you get up to? Tell me perhaps one thing that's been, the most exciting thing that's ever happened in your life. This better be good, because reinsurance doesn't sound very interesting.
Paul, I've always loved adrenaline, doing slightly wacky things. So I guess, a number of things I've done that have been very memorable, like flying planes, doing acrobatics, doing bungee jumps, diving with great white sharks. But probably the best is jumping out of planes.
You had something attached. Yeah, great, fantastic. It sounds, doesn't it, like we've got a cross between Bear Grylls and Crocodile Dundee with us today after that. But,
bipolar.
That's fantastic. Where did you bungee jump?
So that was in New Zealand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I went on my honeymoon to New Zealand. My wife's from New Zealand, and I wanted a bungee jump, but she didn't want to become a widow within a few moments of us being married. So you've had some exciting experience. Tell us about the great white shark as well. Was it a great white?
That was great. Yeah, there were 2 of them. I was diving off Hermanus in a cage, so about 10 foot under the surface. They basically feed behind the boat for a mile or so. And then the sharks start coming in, you see their fins, and you can either go down with an oxygen tank, but that generally scares the sharks, so they don't come as close, or you can hold your breath. So I held my breath, got lowered down, and 2 females over 2 meters came and managed to touch one. It's great.
Wow. And you've still got the fingers.
Yeah, we're all good. Yeah.
Well, exciting moments. Let's get back to reinsurance. And it's obviously going to go downhill from here. No, I'm being terribly rude. I'm sorry for anybody else who's in insurance or reinsurance. Your sort of 22 years ago, your first trip abroad was slightly exciting.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. I didn't get off to a great start. I had a fantastic old boss, actually, who he liked to drink. And he was a great guy. He looked out for me. But I hadn't quite anticipated going flying with him or going on a business trip with him. And I turned up at Heathrow Airport 6 in the morning and was presented with a couple of gin and tonics.
And 6 in the morning?
Yeah, 6. Okay. He was scared of flying, you see. So it didn't make a good combo. We had quite a lot to drink. And I then left my suit at the airport and had to fess up on the other side and go and buy another one. So it wasn't a good start.
So you're off to Marks and Spencer's?
I was in Paphos.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank goodness for Marks and Spencer's. What brought you to work in the city in the first place?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, my father was up in the city. So I saw a little bit of that through him, and I was in awe really of the big lights. I'd come up here, come and visit him. It was a big place. It was exciting. It involved money, which I liked. I think there was a desire from certainly my mid-teenage years after doing some work experience to come up to the insurance market. But I think probably to understand that, you need to go back to my childhood, which, as for so many people, shaped me. So my early years, my father was a missionary. We grew up in South America. So I was in 5 countries in 4 years. It was a pretty unsettling time. The Falklands War broke out at that time. So we were, when it actually broke out, we were bundled into a car late at night and headed towards the border. I remember these little episodes. I don't remember lots, but I do remember some of them. And, fear was certainly an emotion that I grew up with. Being quite alone was one. And,
you were lonely because you were in a Spanish-speaking school.
Yeah.
I mean, were you the only English kid in the school?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, in Chile. And I remember I had one little friend. I think he was our next door neighbor. But I don't really remember anyone apart from that. And it was a difficult period. I remember another episode actually with my mother. We were off shopping in Concepcion, which is Santiago, and we fell asleep on the bus and ended up in a shanty town. The lights came on. There were people all over the bus. The smell of BO was horrendous, and I remember being escorted off and with my mother, and we were told that was that, and she could barely speak Spanish, and eventually they did take us back, one stop further back, and then we were left to fend for ourselves. But I was young at that age, and so some of those memories were pretty big impact on my life. And I think then my father had hepatitis from dirty drinking water. So he was in bed for a year. Wow. So I spent a lot of time with my mother. And actually it was latterly after that he was advised to come back to the UK for treatment. So we did do that. And we were fortunate that Dad's family had an estate in the countryside. So we were able to move there, live on the estate. And I grew up very happily thereafter in a very privileged sort of situation. Went off to boarding school, had some very wealthy friends, and experienced life completely the opposite end of the spectrum, and loved it. And that for me was really the catalyst, I think, to then wanting to go and chase money in the city.
Yeah, when you've seen extreme poverty, but you've also tasted the good life, as it were, then you're going to want. It's obviously which one you're going to want. Yeah. So here you are. You've sort of been here 22 years. As you sort of arrived in the city, what sort of attributes do you need to succeed in the city? I mean, you've obviously got experience of. If somebody was to say, "I want to work in the city," you'd be able to tell them that now. But I'd love to know what you think makes people succeed in the city, and what you thought when you arrived here 22 years ago.
Yeah. I mean, look, it would be sort of wrong of me to say that, that a worldly approach to things, if you've got a good brain, often works. And there are plenty of people that go down that avenue and are very successful. I think having worked with a lot of different people, the people I've come to respect the most are people who've got integrity, people who are team players, people who are honest, people who are always trying to sort of see the best out of other people. I guess that kind of humility, all these things that aren't really, pushed by the city. But actually clients, they desperately want that. They want the truth. And they want to know that, that you're being straightforward with them.
Yeah. So people appreciate those sorts of, high ideals, characteristics.
Yeah.
But that perhaps wasn't what you thought when you first arrived here?
No, I was a proud little brat. I'd been fortunate growing up. I was okay at sport, I did quite well. And there was an arrogance to me growing up, and that was probably something to do with, you know, both sides of my childhood and trying to be something that I wasn't necessarily. So yeah, I mean, look, you know, I had a couple of, as I look back on it, quite amusing episodes, but probably not the best sides of me. I mean, I was playing cricket at prep school actually, and my grandfather was great. He used to come and watch me, and I doted on him. He was terrific. And I remember one day him coming along, and you know, I just decided that our team wasn't good enough, and I'd open the bowling, but not just one end. I'd open both ends.
Are you allowed to do that?
No. So I did that, and then, you know, I'm not sure we did terribly well on the wicket front, but I then went into bat and didn't score very many, and then decided we'd go home. So that was the end of that.
Before the match
Before
finished.
the match went, and off we went. So yeah, and you know, when I was at public school, I played rugby a bit, and you know, I was always that little terrier at the back of the scrum. If someone was in my way, I'd kick them and do whatever I could. And I was competitive. I wanted to win at all costs. And you know, it wasn't until I was 18 I bumped into this guy at Singapore airport, and he sort of tapped me on the shoulder and he said, "Look, Philip, have you seen what you did to me?" And I'd never known. And I literally cut him from top to bottom, and he'd never told me. And you know, it wasn't until a few years later I knew.
Well, so that competitive edge,
Yeah.
you've got this desire to make money because you've seen real poverty.
Yeah.
You've since discovered many of these other qualities are really appreciated.
Yeah.
But perhaps even before you grasped that, you know, life in the city was good.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd be wrong to say life wasn't fantastic in many ways. You know, I loved life. I had money in my pocket. I was able to go and do things and do whatever I wanted. I was free in inverted commas. You know, I was free in my relationships. I was free in what I did, when I wanted to, where I went. You know, I did some amazing things. My 30th birthday was good, actually. I went to Barbados for the night, so that was a good one. But
you went to Barbados for the night.
Yeah, which was good fun.
That sounds great.
So no, I mean, I think it'd be entirely wrong to sit here and say that I didn't enjoy those things, because I did enjoy them. But I think it would also be wrong to not say that I found there was a restlessness during those years. And I think, you know, certainly for me, and it may not be the case for everyone else, I found that the bar was always lifted higher. So, you know, an example might be, you know, I'd always wanted a convertible car. I got a convertible car, BMW. It's a great little thing. And you know, within a year, I wanted a Porsche. And, you know, it was always that kind of competitive spirit to get the next thing. And once I got it, I didn't really sort of enjoy it. It was a bit flat. I just wanted the next thing. And it was constantly sort of pushing the boundaries, wanting more, wanting bigger experiences in my relationships with people, in what I did, where I went, how much money I earned. There was a lack of contentment and a restlessness. And I think, you know, there was something that was actually a bit bigger than all of that. There was a realization that what I was doing probably wasn't the best for me, and an underlying fear of death. You know, there were unanswered questions I had in my mind. I didn't want to go too far. You know, I'd pop into church once in a while, but I'd leave pretty quickly. You know, I tried reading with William, the rector here. That didn't last very long because I knew enough about Christianity to know that, you know, there needed to be a desire, a repentant heart and desire to turn around. And, you know, I wanted both, and I wasn't prepared to compromise.
Yeah. So you've come hoping you're going to make lots of money and I guess retire early, you know, live the dream really. Yeah. And were you on course for retiring early?
No, of course not. No.
Because you spent all your money?
Yeah, I was spending it quicker than it was coming in. So no, absolutely not. I wasn't, no.
And so what was it that sort of, you know, here you are, you're sort of enjoying life, not really feeling deep down that it's satisfying. Yeah. You've got that kind of, I know there might be something more, but I don't really want to look into Christianity because, you know, I'd have to give up this or that or whatever. You know, that whole, I mean, you weren't in absolute turmoil, but that was going on. What was it that sort of shifted? Well,
I mean, I was doing things to the extreme. And, you know, I mean, I'd been smoking since I was 11. I was smoking 2-3 packs a day. You know, in and of itself wasn't great, but then everything else. So, it wasn't good. I went to the doctor to have some fairly routine tests. And he was pretty shocked. He just said to me, look, Philip, all of your tests are really bad, given your sort of family history of heart problems and things like that. This isn't going to end well. And I sort of knew that deep down, but I didn't really know how or what to do about it. I tried various things to stop and always gone back to those things. It was really that was a catalyst to send me back here. And actually, William, he sort of found me fairly quickly. And he just said to me, look, Philip, why don't you give it a chance? Just read the Bible, come and look at the evidence. And, you don't have to do anything with it. You can, carry on your life if you want to. But I've got a great guy who will open the Bible. He's been asking to do that. And you'll like him. And actually, it was a terrific relationship, still is. He's called David, runs a hedge fund. He'd done very well. He was an atheist before he became Christian, but also had a big brain. And that was important for me because I needed to ask the big questions. I needed answers. And so we looked at the historical eyewitness testimony in John's Gospel. We did it through a resource called The Word 1-to-1, which was great because it just gave you answers on the other side of the page. So you'd read a bit of John and then there were some explanations which just fueled conversation. We went off at tangents the whole time. The sandwiches were good. We just went through it and I just kept asking and asking and asking. I wanted to know answers. And, actually I wanted to sort of disprove it probably in many ways because I didn't really want to change. But I knew at this point that things were beginning to change. It was a fantastic sort of experience. I mean, I think for me, when you sort of get into John's Gospel, you see it's very tightly and cleverly worded. And you see the arrival of the king in chapter 2, and you see that bookmarked with, the official son being raised from the dead. And you're sort of left asking, if this is what the kingdom's about, why does everyone in the next 5 chapters reject Jesus? Why are the Jewish people of that day, why will they follow Jesus, but only so far and then reject him? And I think part of the answer is that, he didn't come to bring the kind of kingdom that they wanted. They wanted freedom from the Romans. They wanted food. They wanted, everyday things. And Jesus didn't come to promise to bring that.
And that kind of resonated with you because you were thinking, well, here's this king who's arrived and I don't particularly want what he's come to bring either because I've got to change my life. What was it then that really clinched it for you? You were reading the Bible with David for, 18 months, 2 years?
Yeah, 2 years.
What was it that really brought you to that point to say, I kind of like this life that I'm living in the city, but it's not satisfying, but I don't want to give it up.
Yeah.
What was the clincher?
The clincher was Jesus' death and resurrection. Dead people don't come back to life, quite simply. The disciples didn't believe that. I think that's part of the reason why John spends a lot of time focused on Jesus' ministry, teaching them about his impending death and what that would mean. And when Jesus does die, you see Nicodemus, you see Joseph of Arimathea taking the body down. They think he's dead. They go and put him in a tomb. The women come to embalm his body. The disciples have gone and hidden in a room for fear of the Jews. No one thinks he's coming back. Andrew and Peter have gone back fishing. They didn't think dead people came back to life. But it's very interesting. When Jesus does come back, he doesn't just come back once and appear to them in a one-off experience. He comes lots of times over lots of different periods. And he not only shows them, the physical marks, but he actually explains to them how he's the fulfillment of the whole Old Testament. So he doesn't just come out of nowhere. As William always says, it's a tight grid or matrix by which we interpret Jesus. And, the prophets spoke about what the Savior was going to come and do. And Jesus fits perfectly into that. And I think when the disciples got that, that was transformational. Of course, the Spirit was given as well to empower them to go out and speak this message. But, virtually all of them ended up getting martyred over the period of 40 years, and they never changed their story. You look at the Watergate scandal, within a couple of weeks, everyone was changing their story. So, for me, that was really, really powerful. I just thought, if there was an empty tomb, where was the body? The Jews should have produced it. The Romans should have produced it. If the disciples had got it, they wouldn't have gone and died for Jesus. So where was the body?
This is fascinating listening to you, because I can imagine a number of people here might be going, faith, it's all about, sort of whipping something from up inside you, kind of, people sometimes say to me, I wish I had your faith. I don't think my faith's that incredible, but they wish they had my faith. They might have said something similar to you, but you're saying that faith is based on evidence. It's on factual things. You've got good evidence for the resurrection of Jesus from the dead.
Yeah, and look, someone might say, well, that's only evidence, internal evidence from the Bible, to which I'd say, no, there is external evidence. So, there are historians of the day who are opposed to the Christian sect, Pliny, Suetonius. There is also archaeological evidence, place names, people names, that can all be interrogated. And, the more we're discovering with time, the more it sort of lines up with the gospel accounts.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? You've got those moments in the Gospels when actual times and dates and people are named. It wasn't once upon a time in a land far away.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So you've investigated things, you've suddenly, in your mind, discovered this is true.
Yeah.
I can't ignore that anymore.
Yeah.
What kind of difference did it bring to your life? You'd been living life in many ways to the full. And how did this change you?
Well, there were definite immediate benefits. So, things like smoking and drinking, all those things just overnight stopped. Having tried and tried and tried for years to stop those, just gone overnight. So those things, just a different perspective on relationships, different perspective on money, a different perspective on time, how I worked with people. Look, again, it would be wrong for me to say that I stopped wanting worldly things. That simply isn't the case. I live like we all do in a secular world. I like driving a nice car. We have to have a roof on our heads. But I think the perspective has changed and the priority of those things has changed. And, that is not what defines me now. What defines me is Jesus. As long as I have those things, that's great. But if they get taken away, which they may well do, then they get taken away.
Yeah, perspective is helpful. Let's drill down a bit with that. Can I ask you to put some flesh on the bones? Where does that bite? That perspective, with relationships and I don't want. It's not right for me to ask you about how you use your money, but those sorts of things.
Yeah, I think faithfulness. My wife is the first person I've been faithful with. That has just been an amazing benefit, because if I wasn't a Christian, I definitely wouldn't be married now. So that's been fantastic. I think just the whole relational dynamic with the family. I think, just wanting to see God's kingdom advance now and actually going out there and telling people about Jesus. It's quite funny in the office. I'm known as, New Grundy, but they always ask me to bring out Old Grundy. And they're all saying, come on, give us one night of Old Grundy. I think it's just an empathy and a desire to see other people come to find what I've found. And, it has just been so freeing. I think, death was a big shadow that hung over my life. I was sailing quite close to the wind, and I was fearful. Look, again, there are fears with the process of dying, and that's normal. But also, I have a real confident hope. It's not fairies at the end of the garden. It's a confident hope that there is something beyond the grave. And how do I know that? Well, there's someone that's come from the other side and told us. And And, dead people don't come back from the dead. And yet there is one man who has. And that's tightly framed within thousands of years of prophecy.
Somebody here, thanks so much for that. Somebody here might well be saying, Philip, I'm really glad that works for you. That, clearly you've found something that has made your life better. But, I might be able to find that sort of thing in something else. Indeed, we could probably interview a number of people who'd say my life's better. What would you say to them?
I'd say I agree. I think life may well be better in many ways in a worldly sense before becoming a Christian. Look, the reality is that Christians are the most persecuted people group on earth. There is a cost to becoming a Christian. But I think if all I've said tonight is about the here and now, then I haven't done a very good job in explaining to you. Because, I remember when I was a child, a friend of mine's mother, she said, Philip, make the most of it now because you blink and it's gone. And, here I am now, 45 years old. If I have a good run, I may be halfway. I might be a lot closer. And actually, the kind of perspective you get from Christianity, you realize that you don't need to achieve everything now. That there is this dimension that eternity is stretched out forever. And we can have real confidence that's going to happen. And it's not harps on clouds. It's in a physical body, in relationship with one another, in a world made new. So there'll be a lot of continuity with what we have now. And again, how do I know these things? The Bible. Can we trust the Bible? Let's go back to the evidence and wrestle with it. And there are loads of things in the Bible that are hard, and there are loads of things the Bible doesn't necessarily tell us. But I know enough to be confident.
Yeah, really helpful. So we're talking about much more than just cleaning up your life, making life a little bit better. It's actually about a life that's going to go on forever beyond the grave because of the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Let me ask you sort of one final question for now. Then I'll give a little thought from the Bible. Then we'll have a break, and then I'll grab you back up for any questions that have come from the floor. But if there was someone here. And, what would be one... Well, there are some people here. That's a stupid point, isn't it? If there were some people here, there are. Somebody here looking into the Christian faith, what would be the one thing you'd say to them?
I'd say when you get home tonight, close your door and pray. And maybe say something along the lines of what my wife did. She was from an atheistic family. She'd had no exposure to Christianity. She knew nothing at all. She went through a tough time before we met, and she found herself starting to pray, God, if you're real, answer me. And that was quite simply her prayer. And God in his grace and kindness put us together in quite unexpected circumstances. And when we met, we began exploring the Bible together and discovering Christian faith. And I tell you that little story because, I've had so many experiences of answered prayer. So give it a try. Go and test God. But I think also there is a part on your side as well. And that part is come back. Come back and listen to the word explained. Wrestle with it. Open the word one-to-one with the person that's brought you. Open it. Read it. And you'll have loads of questions. You won't necessarily get all the answers. But in my experience, you'll get enough to make a confident leap of faith.
That's so helpful. Shall we, for this moment, give a big thank you to Philip? Thanks very much indeed. Thank you.
Do you want me to get on?
Yeah, please do. Well, Philip will be back in a little while, as we'll have some questions and answers. For now, just a few thoughts from the Bible. He's helpfully mentioned the Bible a few times, and we'll have a look at one verse. Back in the 1960s, Mick Jagger of the Rolling Stones expressed it singing, "I can't get no da-da-da satisfaction." You're all far too young to remember that. In the 1990s, Edmund Blackadder, played by Rowan Atkinson, put it bluntly when he said, "Life is like a broken pencil, pointless." And Well, you're allowed to laugh if you want to, but don't feel you must. And then 10 years ago, the American actor and filmmaker Woody Allen described life as tough, brutal, grim, meaningless grind full of heartache and tragedy accruing to nothing. In the end, you realize you're just a human being on the face of the earth, an insignificant agglomeration of cells and neurons that eventually expires. Thanks, Woody. And we've heard something similar from Philip. This sense of meaninglessness, purposelessness, emptiness. It's been the experience of millions, not just in the last 60 years, but really since the basement of time. But arguably in the last century, when so many in the human race have acquired so much, so much stuff, so many experiences, so much to entertain us, we've acquired so much, and yet this sense of the futility of it all seems to have increased. Often it's those who actually have achieved their goals that feel it most acutely. The actor Jim Carrey famously said, "I think everybody should get rich and famous and do everything they ever dreamed so that they can see that it's not the answer." Well, easier said than done, eh? Earlier last year, singer-songwriter Billie Eilish opened up about feeling hopeless, and she talks about an existential dread and asking, what is the point of it all? Why keep going? Earlier this year, Bradley Wiggins, knighted in 2013 for services to cycling. Sir Bradley Wiggins, 5-time Olympic gold medalist, first British winner of the Tour de France. I mean, he's at the top of his game, or was. Wiggins admitted to a serious cocaine habit following his retirement from cycling, a habit that he said nearly killed him. He said, "My addiction was easing the pain that I lived with." So successful, yet not satisfied, emotionally tormented he was. It's the experience of so many, from the world of sport to entertainment, in business, and, well, frankly, in every area of life. It seems you can have it all and still feel utterly empty. And while it's reached pandemic proportions in the 21st century, it's not a new phenomenon. 2,000 years ago, Jesus spoke into this very need. If you will, just grab hold of a John's Gospel that's on the table and turn with me to page 31. Helpfully, Philip has mentioned this book a number of times. This is one part of the Bible. There are 4 eyewitness accounts of Jesus' life in the Bible: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. This is one of them, John's Gospel. A guy called John wrote it. He knew Jesus very well, having lived with him for 3 years. Allow me to direct you to just one sentence. It's chapter 10 and verse 10. It's the top of page 31. And halfway through that line 10, Jesus said, you see it there, "I came." That is, he's saying, "I came into the world. I came that they, human beings, you and me, I came that we may have life and have it abundantly." "I've come," said Jesus, "so you can get the most out of life, enjoy life to the max." And to me, those words are surprising, intriguing, and shocking. First, surprising, because many people think that Jesus came to take out all the fun out of life. I think of one man I spoke to some years ago, his name was Bill. Bill said to me, "I'm not interested in God. He just tells me all the things I can't do. Thou shalt not do this, that, and the other." And I've got to say, that was my first experience of Christianity as I sat in church as a lad, bored to tears. And many feel the same way about Jesus and Christianity: dull, boring, restrictive, and a million miles away from enjoying life to the full. As one guy said to me, "Jesus cramps my style." He's never been a problem for me. I've never had any style, but I think I know what he means. That's what many people feel about Jesus. And quite possibly that's because those who do follow Jesus and present him and represent him, present him as something of a killjoy, somebody who robs life of enjoyment. So what a surprise to hear Jesus say something quite different, quite the opposite. "I have come that you may have life to the full, live life to the max." The very thing that many of us are looking for. So if we find his words surprising here, could it be that this sort of restrictive, dull, boring experience we've had of Christianity, or imagine that Jesus would bring to our lives, could it be that we haven't actually experienced the real McCoy, not actually met the real Jesus? That whatever we have had is a poor imitation of the real thing? These words then are surprising. Secondly, they're intriguing. These words are intriguing because I reckon everyone sets out on life to make the most out of life. Think back to when you were just starting out on life. Imagine asking your teenage self, what do you want to achieve in life? What do you want to get out of life? I can't imagine any of us replying, I just want to be positively mediocre, very ordinary. I want to be nothing out of the blue. I can't think anyone has, if I can put it this way, set their sat-nav, their life sat-nav, to reach a place called commonplace, average, vanilla. I'm on a course to be nothing out of the blue. Of course, many of us do feel that that is how our life has ended up, but I don't think anybody set out on that course in the first place. And that is why life feels so cruel so often, because life has this knack of snatching away all our hopes and dreams, leaving us crushed and devastatingly empty. I came across an interview with the indie band Half Alive, hugely successful band. The video of their hit Still Feel has over 29 million views on YouTube. In an interview, lead singer Josh Taylor was asked about how he kept grounded in the light of all the success he was experiencing. He said this: "There's this quote that comes to mind of some billionaire who said that when people asked him what it was like to be at the top, he replied, 'Once you get to the top, you realize there's nothing there.'" And Taylor continues, "People think that there's this arrival moment, but there isn't ever one." Very perceptive for one so young. Maybe he studied psychology, where there is a thing called arrival fallacy, this misconception that enduring happiness will be realized when I reach a particular goal. It's a common thing, telling ourselves that we'll be satisfied when I get that job, that house, that girl, whatever. And then we get that thing, get to the top and realize there's nothing. And so life is full of crushing disappointment. And Jesus speaks of that here as well, you see. Look at again this line 10 at the top of page 31. He starts this line with these words: "The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy." Life has this cruel knack of doing just that, robbing us. Dreams are stolen, life taken, hopes destroyed, careers ended, relationships broken. Our news feeds are full of it. Just 2 weeks ago in Uxbridge, 49-year-old Wayne Broadhurst stabbed and killed while walking his dog, for goodness sake. And this morning, did you see the news that 34-year-old Katie Fox had died? She was stabbed in an unprovoked attack at a bus station, a bus stop on Friday outside the Bullring shopping centre in Birmingham. Look, I could keep scrolling down my news feed and we could spend the rest of our time just recounting examples of this verse 10, the thief comes to steal and kill and destroy. But never mind the news stories, I reckon we could tell our own stories of life kicking us in the shins, of loved ones getting ill, of friends suffering relationship breakdown, of we ourselves getting dealt bitter blows. And here's the thing, we set out in life to enjoy life to the full, but it seems so often life conspires against us. And even if our story doesn't have a big defining moment of crushing disappointment, so many of us end up just sort of drifting in a sea of mediocrity, feeling that life doesn't quite live up to all that it promised to be. So how intriguing to hear Jesus say that he can give us what we've always wanted, life to the max. So these words are surprising, they're intriguing, and third, they're really quite shocking. Jesus says, "I have come that you may have life to the full." Implication, without me, you couldn't enjoy life to the full. Who does Jesus think that he is? I mean, just imagine me introducing myself to you earlier. I went round a few of the tables as you arrived. Imagine you'd never met me before, and I came up to you and I said, "Oh, my name's Paul. I'm so pleased you've come. We're going to be thinking about hope tonight. You know, you can find hope in me. I am actually what life's all about. I'm so glad you've met me." I mean, you would be quite pleased that I left you, and when I left you, you'd think to yourself, who is this trumped-up little egotist to think that he is the meaning of life, and you'd be pleased never to see me again, I imagine. And yet that is what Jesus is saying here. It's shocking, isn't it? Who does Jesus think he is? Well, to answer that question, look at the next line, line 11. Jesus said, "I am the good shepherd." It is a claim to be none other than God himself. The I am is the name that God himself gave himself when he revealed himself to a character called Moses some 1400 years before Jesus said these words. And now Jesus is saying, "I am the great I am." And he repeated it again and again in John's Gospel. You can read it for yourself. And so if you've come here wondering, is there a God? If you're trying to connect with the transcendent, wondering if there's something greater, something beyond, something bigger than all of this, here is why Christians are so sure that there is. Because this is the claim: God has come and walked among us and shown that he is God by the remarkable things that he's done. And wonderfully, if this is true, then in connecting with Jesus, we're connecting with God. And we're connecting with the very one we were made to live for, the very one we were made for. And Jesus doesn't only do that by showing us that God exists, but as we read in verse 11, he does it by laying down his life. Do you see it there in line 11? I'm the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. And with this, we get to the very heart of the Christian faith, and I'm going to wind up in just a moment. When Jesus said those words, he is here talking about his death on a cross. A death he died in order to restore our relationship with God. We heard it from Philip earlier, how he said that he turned away from God. And what is true of Philip is true of us all, and that's why we feel empty. So we look to fill the void in other things, when what we actually need is to be reconciled with God, and that is precisely what Jesus came for. Dying on the cross so that we could have our relationship with God restored. I'm the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep, he says in line 11. So here is the great I am, dying for you and me because he loves you and me, and he longs to be in a relationship with you and me. It's staggering, isn't it? But he not only died for us, he rose from the grave. Look down to line 17. Jesus said, "For this reason the Father loves me, because I lay down my life that I may take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay down my life of my own accord. I have authority to lay it down, and I have authority to take it up again." It's an astonishing thing to say. I lay down my life and I take it up again. Sometimes people do decide to lay down their lives. It's something we rightly remember at this time of the year. Remembrance. People willingly laying down their lives for others. It's a wonderful thing. But when someone does that, laying down their lives in death, they can't take it up again. But that's what Jesus did. He predicted it here, and then he did it, rising from the dead. And his resurrection from the dead is the key to understanding how we can have life to the max, life that we long for. There are two things you need if you're going to enjoy life to the full: length of life and quality of life. And Jesus' resurrection points us to a life that lasts beyond the grave, exactly what Philip was saying earlier, but also a quality of life to be spent in eternity forever in a wonderful place, in a wonderful relationship. Just think of the best day you've ever had in your life. A day with your loved one, the love of your life, with your family, with your bestie. The sun is shining. It's a beautiful place. You feel at ease and at peace all day. You love every minute of the day. A day when you think to yourself, I really wish this day would never end. And then imagine it never did. That's what Jesus came to give us. We get a glimpse of it now when we start to follow him in this life, but we will get it fully when we are with him for eternity. And that's why Jesus could say, I have come that you may have life and have it in all its fullness. Words that are surprising, intriguing, and shocking. But if they're true, they're absolutely cracking.
Well, thanks, Philip and Paul, for all you've shared so far. Thank you for some great questions coming in. There's still time to send a few more in. So if you'd like to send any more questions in as we speak, we have about 10 minutes now to answer them. Just to start with, Philip, this isn't a very serious question, but someone's asked, what did the shark feel like?
It was very rough, the skin. Yeah, I wasn't that brave. I felt it pretty quickly.
Okay, not near the mouth.
Not near the mouth, no.
Sensible. Now here's a bit of a longer question. The questioner asks, given you work in a sector that at its core is based on probabilities, expected outcomes, but also a great deal of randomness, how do you eliminate the argument that all the decisions you've made, meeting and being loyal to your wife, seeing the need to pack in the drink and ciggies, and then you finding faith were not down to coincidence or random outcomes?
Yeah, I mean, that is a terrific question. I think what I would want to say to that is, I mentioned about this grid that we have in the Old Testament. So, the whole Old Testament is over a long period, and we have the prophets really giving this picture of what the Messiah will look like. And when Jesus comes along, he walks off the pages of history onto, into Jerusalem and to real life. So I think what we have with Jesus is historical fact. Our whole date system revolves around this person. The claims are so binary. I said it before, but dead people don't come back to life. The very fact that Christianity puts out there at center stage that one man did come back from the dead. And not only that, but we have the whole context of thousands of years. And then we have Jesus' earthly ministry where he talked about it. He taught his disciples. His disciples didn't believe it either until after the event.
And there's lots of things in the Bible that are important, like the resurrection. But someone's asked here, does a Christian have to accept everything in the Bible, including controversial and hard teaching on things like homosexuality, to be a Christian?
You look at me, I think it's a super question. Thanks very much indeed. I think the thing to do is to look at the character of God. So the wonderful thing about Jesus, if this is true that he really is God, then I now know what God is like. I not only know he exists, but I know what he's like. Now, if you read a gospel, you'll begin to discover, I think, certainly I discovered it when I started reading the Bible when I was 20, I started reading Matthew's gospel. I was just bowled over by this character, Jesus, the most loving man who ever lived, kind, compassionate, thoughtful, but also strong. He's a man's man. He stood up against wrongdoing and wanted justice to be done. He's the sort of character, exactly the sort of character that you'd want, and certainly the sort of God you'd want. Now, I think once you've got that, then when you get to the difficult things, you can go, why does Jesus say that? Or why does God say that to me? Oh, it's because he's loving and he's kind and he wants the best for me and I can trust him. So you actually get to the point where you don't go, oh, I've got to believe this really difficult thing that I don't really like, to, I don't always understand exactly why he might say that, but because I know so much about his character, I know I can trust him in that. And I'd be interested to know if this is your experience, Philip, and you, Luke, that I found, as I've gone on in the Christian life, things that I have done in obedience to him that don't seem to make sense, when I've done it, make a lot of sense.
There you go.
Yeah, I think I found that, I remember someone saying to me years ago, it's about whether Jesus has the authority to say it. And as Philip was saying, if someone dies and then comes back from the dead and you believe that, then that gives him a certain amount of authority. And the same with Paul, really. As I've continued to listen to Jesus, I found that over time he's been right and I've been wrong when I've been disagreeing with him.
And just take a step back. If Jesus is the creator of all things, it is profoundly arrogant that I should be able to think that I know best. Surely if he made us and he made everything, he knows what's best for me.
That's right. And speaking about that, someone's asked a question, I guess, to you, Paul. Why isn't the answer to dissatisfaction or the arrival syndrome and restlessness just to be content and enjoy the journey and be happy with the life? And why does someone actually need Jesus?
Well, I mean, if I can go back to something that Philip said, I thought was extremely helpful, Philip, when you were saying that if all you've said tonight is follow Jesus and life will be better, then you could probably find something better, a better way of living in other things. Not, you don't have to compare them. You say, well, if I live this way, it'd be better than the life I've got now, so I'll live that way. But ultimately, Jesus didn't just come to make life better, even though many of us kind of feel that does happen. He's come to deal with the problem of our being estranged from God. And you might say, well, doesn't matter to me that I'm estranged from God. I remember a good friend of mine, when I was in the newspaper business, I was sharing the Christian message with him. And he said to me, well, I'm quite happy living life as I am now. It doesn't bother me that I'm estranged from God. The problem comes when I meet that God in death. You know, if it's true that I'm going to die and meet God and have ignored him all my life, I'm in big trouble. And so really what we're saying is that Christianity isn't just about making life a bit better now. It's about the ultimate issue of being ready to meet my Maker. And eternity, without stating the obvious, is a very long time. If this is true, would it not make sense for me to want to be investigating how I can spend eternity with God in a beautiful relationship, in a beautiful place forever? I think that's too good to miss.
Yeah, and I think I was certainly guilty of this. I think before being a Christian, I just thought I'd be able to blag it on the nights, and you know, I'm pretty good at doing that. God will be all right with me. But the problem is, my bar was this high, and God's bar was way beyond anything I could ever keep. You know, the law is summed up by loving God with your whole heart and loving your neighbor as yourself. And you know, if I was honest with myself, I knew I didn't even get off first base. So there's no way I'm going to be able to pull the wool over God's eyes on that final day. But in his kindness, he's given me a way out. And it's not because of anything I've earned, anything I've done, which is completely countercultural, completely against the world's value system. And it is glorious. And I think when that takes root in your heart, suddenly, you know, everything changes.
And I don't like thinking about judgment when I think about myself, but like some of the things you mentioned, Paul, the horrible murder on Friday night, some of the atrocities in war. And when I think about those things, it's actually good news that God cares and those things really matter, I think.
Yeah, and I think we don't like the idea of Judgment Day because we know we're guilty deep down. But, you know, if someone goes and rapes your child or goes and kills your child, I think your perspective on judgment changes. And, you know, it is entirely right and fair that God will enact justice. And actually, you know, our world is, you know, in a dark place. It's always been in a dark place, but, you know, maybe through social media and other things, we're much more aware of what's going on. And actually, it's a really good thing that God will do something at the end and that those people won't get away. But it's also a terrifying thing that we're all accountable, and there is only one safe place to be, and that's in Jesus.
Yeah. So let's say we take that. Someone's said this. I do find this life pretty depressing, though. Is it just miserable from here until I die and I get a new life with Jesus? Or is there hope for me for the next 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years?
Great question. Look, life for a large proportion of the world's population is very, very difficult. I mean, we're in a unique situation here in this country in the West. You know, we are much more free financially than the large majority of the world. But I think going back to what we were saying before, that's why justice is a good thing at the end. I also think that, look, you know, if we're looking for our contentment in the world, it will never deliver. You know, God has given us great things to enjoy. And I'm not saying for 1 minute, don't enjoy those things. You know, he's given us freedom. You know, we live in a land of grace where we're free and to enjoy these things, you know, and we're here to enjoy them. But actually, if our happiness is focused on having those things, then we're never going to find fulfillment. So actually, a way to counter that is look to Jesus and, you know, maybe your desires will change.
Yeah, thank you. That's such a helpful question as well. We can't promise, we'd be wrong to promise that if you became a Christian, life would be easy for the next 10, 20, 30 years. There's no guarantee of that. As Philip said, when I was interviewing him, you know, for the majority of Christians, life gets harder, not easier. But I can certainly tell you of a number of people I've met who have been through extraordinarily difficult times. Sometimes people, you know, I think of a good friend of mine who's suffered for 35 years with extraordinary pain every single day, and yet she has a joy that I can't explain where she gets that from, except that it's from God. It's not that life isn't difficult; it is extraordinarily difficult. Yet she has a joy, and I think of one of Jesus' early followers, my namesake Paul. He said these words: "I have learned to be content in all circumstances." It's remarkable. When he said those words, he was in prison because he was following Jesus. Now, that doesn't mean life's easy for the next 20, 30 years. But think of a joy that can transcend that, and a contentment that can overcome that, and that's quite something. But ultimately, I think we'd all go back to say, you could have a dreadful 20, 30 years, but just think of eternity where all of that is dealt with, and it's wonderful forever. That's really at the heart of Christianity.
Thank you. Maybe we could finish with this, maybe for you, Philip. What's the biggest difference of life day to day following Jesus for you?
My wife and I start the day praying together, reading the Bible. I'm like a typical bloke. I'm not very good at communicating what I'm feeling and thinking often. I'm too busy with work. I get that tired, and I'm not really there to talk often, which is hard for her in the week anyway. But praying actually is fantastic, because we have that 15, 20 minutes, half an hour every morning where we're just totally honest with each other, and we're vulnerable and praying for each other. And that has been an enormous help, particularly in a stressful and pressured job. It's been of huge value.
Well, thanks so much, Philip, for sharing with us. Thanks for Paul for all you shared.